didn't give us any idea what the difference was between the two titles. So we've had to initially do some research to look at who out there is practicing within the scope of practice of psychotherapy as included in the Psychotherapy Act. And we went through that process and identified quite a very diverse range of practitioners, some of whom use titles that would suggest that they're various kinds of counselors, others who are therapists of one kind or another. Very few people actually, or very few practitioners actually use the title psychotherapist, we've learned, not to our surprise actually. So the scope of practice of psychotherapy, this is something that's embedded in the Psychotherapy Act, and what we would say is that if you're practicing the kind of work that falls into the description of the scope of practice, you should be regulated and become a member of this new college, unless you're a member of another regulated profession, such as the psychologist or one of the other professions regulated under the umbrella legislation, which permits 3 other health professions, the occupational therapists, nurses, and physicians, to practice psychotherapy. And in addition to that, social workers in Ontario, through their college, will be permitted to use the title psychotherapist and practice psychotherapy. So what that boils down to is if you're not going to be a member of one of those other regulated professions and you do this kind of work, then you should most likely become a member of the College of Psychotherapists and Mental Health Therapists. And if you're going to be doing the controlled act of psychotherapy, and Catherine alluded to the fact that there are, under the umbrella health professions legislation, there's a list of 13 restricted activities known as controlled acts, and there will be 14, the 14th being the controlled act of psychotherapy once the Psychotherapy Act is fully proclaimed. And once that happens, only people who are regulated professionals will be able to practice the controlled act of psychotherapy, which is a subset of the scope of practice of psychotherapy. I have the wording for both of those, and they're in the handout if any of you got it. I've got more copies here of our newsletter, which explains a lot of that in more detail, or you could go onto our website. And I mean, the 2 key things are the scope of practice, are you doing this? And if so, you should probably be regulated in one college or another, depending on your training and your background and your professional goals. And if you're doing the controlled act, you will be required to be registered. And as Catherine mentioned, the controlled act of psychotherapy focuses on treating, and the word that's used is treating, a serious disorder, behavioral, cognitive, etc., disorder that may, big word, that may impair an individual's functioning. So if you're doing that, you're going to need to be regulated somewhere. We, as I mentioned, are developing the registration requirements. It just so happens that this past week, our council did approve our registration regulation in draft form, which means that we are later this month going to embark on a series of consultation meetings and take this regulation on the road, so to speak. And we will be, these are open public meetings, inviting anybody in the community or students, practitioners, anybody who has an interest in the work of the Transitional Council to attend, to comment, and on the basis of the input we receive, no doubt we will be revising the registration regulation, possibly the misconduct regulation as well. And later in the summer, we will be embarking on a more formal consultation process, which involves inviting written submissions within a prescribed time period. And by the fall, we hope to have our regulations submitted to government. Then the next steps in the whole process with the Transitional Council, we have some big projects to undertake. We actually have to develop a framework for assessing and approving education programs. And because of the great diversity of training backgrounds of future members, that's going to be quite a complex task. We're going to be developing competency profiles for the 2 titles, and that will be another big project. There's a lot of work that has to happen, which will probably take a couple more years actually before the legislation will be proclaimed. And in fact, the government has told us, because of this Control Act, and because they don't want people to be caught in a kind of a limbo where the legislation is proclaimed and the Control Act is in effect, but people are not yet registered and therefore would find themselves in breach of the legislation, we're going to be pre-registering members, which means we'll be assessing their applications and basically accepting them for registration. And then on the date that the proclamation happens, we send out all those certificates. We do expect that we're going to have a grandparenting group which is probably not of such great interest to you folks, but for established practitioners who may not meet all of the registration requirements. This is an alternate route, and we do expect there'll be a different set of criteria, and experience will play a significant role in that. And we expect that initially a large percentage of members may be grandparented, and they will be able to use the titles and have all of the rights and obligations, I guess, of membership. What else can I tell you? I have some more handouts here. I have, these are the consultation meetings that we're going to be holding later this month and into early April. I have a table that sets out, it's a summary of the registration regulations as they now appear, and says all over the place here, subject to change, draft, discussion purposes only. We've been trying to be very open about what we're doing, the thinking of the council and the registration committee, and it is evolving and changing, and this has been updated a number of times, and it's on our website as well. This is a copy of our newsletter, which some of you may have, and it has a lot of this information that I just went over about the scope of practice, the Control Act, the difference between the 2 titles, and who needs to be regulated. If you choose not to be regulated, there is actually I don't know how my time is. Okay, there's an exemption for counseling in the RHPA, which is the umbrella legislation. However, it's a circular definition, and it says that if you do this, then you're exempt from the requirement to be registered. So if you, this is what is exempt: communication made in the course of counseling about emotional, social, educational, spiritual matters. It doesn't define counseling. We do have from the Health Professions Advisory Council a definition, they drew a distinction between counseling and psychotherapy. And I think that's also included in our newsletter. It's one sentence, I can read it here if you like. What they have said is that the practice of psychotherapy is distinct from both counseling, where the focus is on the provision of information, advice giving, encouragement, and instruction, and spiritual counseling, which is counseling related to religion or faith-based beliefs. So if you're doing that kind of fairly narrowly focused counseling where the focus is on information giving, advice giving, encouragement, instruction, or spiritual counseling, then you would not, you could consider that as apart from psychotherapy. And just in terms of, if you choose not to be regulated, as Catherine meant, you won't be able to use any of the protected titles or hold yourself out as somebody who is qualified to practice psychotherapy in Ontario, and you'll have to be very careful not to practice the Controlled Act, which is working with clients who have severe disorders. And a lot of information on our website now, so do take a look, and we will be updating it in terms of what the registration regulations will look like. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you very much. So Susan from the Ontario Society of Psychotherapists.
Good morning. My name is Susan Stevenson. I'm from the Ontario Society of Psychotherapists. Can you hear me at the back? I know my voice doesn't carry that well. I'm on the board this year. I'm the professional, public relations. I have been on the board of the OSP now probably for about, I'm afraid to say, probably about 10 years. I'm past president. It's when you get into this organization, it starts to absorb you, and it's amazing how much the organization has people committed to the process of psychotherapy. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the organization, but I'd also like to tell you a little bit about my own personal journey and how I got involved in it. The OSP was founded in 1991. It is only Ontario-based. There are 300 members. Most of them, probably 2/3 of them, are here in the GTA. The other third in the surrounding outlying areas, east, north, and west. We would go as far as London, Windsor, Kingston, Belleville area, and then far north actually. We have people up in Kapuskasing, Wawa area. So it is quite inclusive across Ontario. The reason why it was founded was it was founded in 1991, and as I said, we're a small organization, but there were a number of people that believed that we wanted to provide a coherent professional voice to related professionals for the general public and the government, a place where liability insurance was an affordable possibility, where psychotherapists could experience a sense of fellowship with peers, and where professional development and new learning was valued and promoted. So that's the only thing I'm going to read to you at this point, because that's our basic founding members established that as a historical piece. We are, the majority of the practicing psychotherapists are in private practice. They practice many different modes of psychotherapy: relational, psychodynamic, art therapy. Again, we have a website. I brought brochures this morning. We serve many different populations: adult, children, couples, groups. And we have 4 different levels of membership. We have a clinical membership, a qualifying membership, a student membership, and a supporting membership. And all of those are listed on the website, and what you would need for each of those specific areas as far as becoming a member. I'll tell you about my own journey, and then I'll tell you about why I'm telling you about my own journey. I was an individual, and I was in nursing actually. I was working in London, Ontario. I was teaching at Fanshawe College. I had a baccalaureate degree, and teaching so both educationally, and then I went on to become a head nurse and a clinical supervisor in a hospital at that point. But because of, and I shouldn't say but, it was a journey for me that I started into my own personal psychotherapy because of my background. And I, the saying, you love the product so much you bought the company. Well, that was sort of what I did. It was getting embarrassing as to how much personal psychotherapy I had done, and realized that I had to do something more, that nursing wasn't going to cut it for me any longer. And I know that you're a nurse in your background as well. So I knew that my back wouldn't hold out, plus the fact that I had done so much of my own personal psychotherapy. I thought, I'm going to go on to go to university, and I did actually the same program as a lot of you are doing here, my MEd, and I did it at Western at the time, at Althouse, for those of you who are familiar with Western. So I came out of that program with a Master's of Education in Counseling, and then as a family we moved to Toronto, and I thought, okay, I've got hundreds of hours of my own personal psychotherapy. What do I do with this? I wanted to find a professional, a home for myself, and I started looking around at the different bodies. And the Ontario Society of Psychotherapy psychotherapists was one of those professional homes that would, or actually wanted me to have had or done my own personal psychotherapy. So there are different levels of, and I'll go through the